We've had a lot of, there you go. Had a lot of folks actually request this. So we're doing that to share out with our members and those who are interested but can't make it today. And along with that, also want to acknowledge that I think there might be some news media joining us today. And we really appreciate your coverage and just you listening in to hear what we're talking about. Finally, we have some information to share after this. So the Conservation Cafeteria actually is just an opportunity to talk with you all as members and the interested public. And then after this presentation, you can expect some follow-up from us in terms of an action form, a fact sheet, and additional information. So if you didn't get everything in the Conservation Cafeteria, we didn't even get to answer perhaps all of your questions, we'll be following up. And of course, you know how to get a hold of us, everyone who's speaking. We're so happy to continue to talk and share more information. So thank you all again. And with that, I'm going to actually share my screen. We have a presentation for you all. And yeah, we'll kick off the meat of this. So let's share. Hold on, bear with me here. I'm going to stop that. And we have our tech support here, quick at hand, fortunately. Let's see. Thanks for taking a look, Max.
Yeah, totally.
Share. Should be this presentation.
Yeah, that's the one.
Share it, and then I get this. Screen sharing is paused.
Let me just hop in here for a sec.
Oh, perfect.
Okay. Everyone see that? Okay. Yeah. So
can folks give a thumbs up if they can see this? Awesome. Cool.
Let's go to your
view slideshow. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of tech logistics. Appreciate it all. All right. So welcome to our Conservation Cafeteria. It's a discussion here around federal funding that's at risk. And real quick, just some high-level background before turning it over to our program leads who are real experts on this. Want to talk very quickly about some of the high-level federal funding and programs that we think are currently at risk. And it's funny to kind of start this conversation off. I remember 3 years ago in September giving a conservation cafeteria to many of the same folks who are on this call right now about the Inflation Reduction Act and what was in that law when it was passed, the amount of funding for Wyoming and for other states. And it was a hugely significant and historic investment we saw in the previous administration related to energy infrastructure, and a number of other things as well. It was about $400 billion. And this happened actually right after another very significant investment, the bipartisan infrastructure law, or the IIJA, which was November of 2021 that was passed, which had about $1.2 trillion for a number of different projects that span a huge, huge scope, obviously way bigger than we can get into in this discussion. So we're going to help narrow it down a little bit to programs that WAC has been focused on and that other groups around the state, many who are on this call actually, who have been very focused on and are eager to talk about, and also concerned that could be cut here as we go into a budget reconciliation process. So the big picture there is there was a lot of money on the table through the Inflation Reduction Act. And a big chunk of that actually, I remember seeing news reporting around $7 billion potentially for Wyoming through that program or through that law. And I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that that funding was there. Wyoming listened. Wyoming got to work. Wyoming applied for many programs that we actually saw through the Inflation Reduction Act. Good examples of this: Wyoming created a grants management office. I know I attended 2 of the different meetings, their annual meetings in 2023 and then 2024 in Riverton. And our leadership, our congressional and state leadership, really helped usher that in. as significant opportunities for Wyoming communities and residents. And so now we're at a point where many of those programs, especially those related to energy, emissions reductions, um, renewable energy, are being either called into question or frozen with the potential of not moving forward at all. And so the goal here of this conservation cafeteria is really to highlight some of the more important programs that impact residents, communities, and tribal governments, and urge folks to take action because we do believe that now is the time to be writing our elected officials. We'll talk a little bit about how to do that in different ways. We can try to make a cohesive message around the programs that we think are important. And I say this too because a lot of the programs that a number of us have been working on are much more geared toward residents and communities. There are some really big project funding, a lot of project funding for big infrastructure projects that is getting a lot of advocacy right now. Folks are going to DC to advocate on behalf of a lot of these programs. But the area that we definitely see as being underrepresented or not having as much advocacy are the programs that would really impact communities. And so we're trying to bring some awareness to that. And a number of the programs that we will highlight today with some of our staff around the home energy savings program, the Solar for All program, the Tribal Electrification program, and the Rural Energy for America program, as well as some energy and tax credits that we think are really important and widely popular. So with that said, I'd love to introduce our two program leads who have been in the weeds on these programs and who are actually next week headed to Washington, D.C., among a number of other folks, both in Wyoming, but also more broadly across the Mountain West, to advocate directly for these programs and try to make sure folks understand that they're important. And so with that, I'd love to introduce Jonathan Williams, who's on the call here, and Big Win Carpenter, who both will share some of the programs and the insights that they have related to their importance and why we as a collective group and our members at WAC and others should be advocating for them now. And so, Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you and let me advance the slide deck.
One too many. Oh, there it is.
Got it.
Great. Thank you, John, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to kick us off today, just elaborating a bit on what John was sharing for big picture overview, and then diving into like what we are dealing with right now and the programs that are at risk. I think big picture, I just want to add some framing to what the IRA brought to Wyoming, and that it's really important to understand these as direct investments into communities, into residents, and also into our tribal nations here. And that, certainly it covers a really broad swath of things from local infrastructure, for projects that could harden our energy transmission lines to wastewater to drought mitigation. It bolsters Wyoming's workforce and helps it transition and diversify, something that the state's really needing. And I think at the key of this, at the community level and at the tribal level, these programs were designed to address local needs and priorities, and to bring those dollars into these areas and have community groups working with local governments, working with the state to address these issues. And so really it's a forward-looking, investing in, kind of like the future of what Wyoming's going to look like in the next 10 to 20 years. And so that's kind of like this like general framing piece that I just wanted to emphasize. And that certainly, the Outdoor Council is interested in this because of the missions, but also a lot of these programs also would just, help residents save money, help communities save money. And there's certainly some other co-benefits as well worth acknowledging. I'm thinking specifically of like human health impacts, the ability of communities and tribes to respond to like natural emergencies from like wildfire to drought, and certainly just quality of life. And so, yeah, that's kind of what's at stake here. And what's happened recently is two different things in particular that's threatening these investments. One, first and foremost, is there was an executive order that froze funding from infrastructure, the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law. And this is, billions of dollars being distributed nationwide. and has a real impact on projects in Wyoming, some of which had already been completed, some that were underway, and some that were yet to come. And this caused a vast amount of uncertainty. We still don't know how many of these programs will be impacted in the long term from this really abrupt halt in funding. And we know of instances where programs have actually, are on the ground, staff are hired, we're working to invest in some sort of infrastructure or community benefit project. And we are unable, those communities are unable to pay contractors that are actually doing the work, or they're unable to take the next step in that program because their funding is frozen. And so it's causing a lot of uncertainty. And where we're really focused on is on the programs that benefit specifically like low income residents, tribal community members, non-tribal community members. And right now, is over $110 million worth of funding for a variety of programs that Wyoming communities in the state work together to secure that we do not have access to. One of the programs, a home energy rebate, was supposed to come online in just a few months, and we now have no idea of when that's actually going to roll out. And so that's some of what this funding freeze is doing. Which is then this problem of uncertainty is then exacerbated by some uncertainty coming out of Congress as well. While we think it's unlikely that the IRA would be repealed in its entirety because it targets everything from industry, manufacturing, all the way down to the residential side of things. We don't think it'd be repealed in its entirety, but we do think vast parts of it are under threat right now of being taken away. And those will be the projects that we focus on in just a little bit. So two things are going on, and both of them have major implications for investments that we would love to see in this state. Big One, do you want to talk this next point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the issues with taking an axe to these bills is that a lot of these decisions are being made too quickly, which is limiting the amount of input that's coming from the communities that these programs serve. And so what this slide really boils down to is why these federal programs are so important and why they mean so much to Wyoming. These aren't abstract government initiatives. They really are helping benefit our communities here on the ground in Wyoming.
Yep.
And we can go down the list thinking of, speaking of the local infrastructure projects, we're talking about weatherization, energy efficiency upgrades, and these are fundamental building blocks to allow Wyoming residents to access services that they otherwise wouldn't be afforded. Talking about a growing competitive workforce, as we start to see work development changing, a lot of these programs would have supported job training, workforce development, and investments in these emerging industries that are happening in Wyoming. And as we put funds towards that, that will ensure that Wyoming can remain competitive in the long run. Speaking on thriving communities, it's really important that we speak of that because not only are these programs helping local communities, but they're also supporting local businesses. And when we support these local businesses, these programs are contributing to the well-being of these communities. And that last point, and I think perhaps the one that's felt mostly directly by our residents, many of these programs are designed to save residents money. And when we're talking about energy efficiency upgrades, renewable energy initiatives, and the programs that are intended to lower utility costs, a lot of these programs have a tangible impact on how our communities are funded, and they put more dollars in Wyoming households. And this is why our advocacy in DC is so critical. First and foremost, talking about our asks in DC, we have to advocate to secure the funding that has already been approved under the IRA and the IIJA. Our state and the tribes have diligently vetted these programs. They've applied for them, and they were obligated these funds and given the green light. And so we need to tell Congress to ensure that these commitments are honored and that these obligated funds flow into our communities. Secondly, we're asking Congress to protect key IRA and IIJA programs that have a strong backing from folks here in Wyoming. And um, a lot of these programs, they address real needs identified and supported by our communities.
Yeah, and that's why, certainly these two asks are really important, but we also know that like now is that time, and we have heard directly from our members of Congress that these programs are in jeopardy, and we are seeing bills coming out, by the day, where funds for X, Y, or Z project would get redirected into a different priority. And we're going to fly to DC with a contingency of elected officials, city employees, a group that represents organized labor, and we're going to ask for more community consultation and to listen to residents that would benefit from these programs. And we think that's really key here, as we know a lot of things are happening really fast, and that can be scary and hard to predict and hard to make long-term plans. So that's going to be one of the asks that we have when we're in DC. And we think that the timing of you all in this group and others that aren't here is really important to kind of complement, like an in-person visit where we're going there, is also to make your voice heard and to continue to make it heard for programs that you want to see. And hopefully we can have a bit of a synergistic moment where our elected officials can hear that and take action through Congress. And so that's kind of the point of what we're doing there. John, you can go ahead and move us forward a slide. Let's talk a little bit about just some of the key programs that we've been watching, and we would love for you all to highlight. One is the Home Energy Savings Program, coming out of the home energy rebates. And this is a program for low income, moderate income Wyomingites. It was supposed to come online in June or July of this year, and it's been frozen. It was a program that was approved and could bring money directly in the form of upfront rebates to households to invest in things like energy efficiency, new insulation, updating their wiring, which, as you know, and if you ever looked in an old home, sometimes it's actually not entirely safe or up to code, and to invest in high efficiency appliances. And this is a really good program for, again, that low income side of Wyoming's population, which is actually about 41% of Wyoming households would qualify as low income. And those individuals spend about 10% of their income every year on energy to heat and cool their homes. And this is a real problem. And it kind of comes back to this bigger picture problem, like this community need and priority of having affordable housing. And we see the home energy rebates as just one strategy of many to address that larger societal problem that we have in Wyoming. And a program that we've been working with for years now, with relevant state agencies. There was time for the public to provide input on this program, and one that we really see as key for both tribal and non-tribal community members.
Absolutely. And I'll take a minute to talk about the Solar for All and tribal electrification real quick. And so Solar for All, this program is designed to help low-income residents afford rooftop solar installations to lower their electricity costs. There are two applications in the state of Wyoming. There's the Wyoming State application, which was applied for by the Bonneville Environmental Foundation on behalf of the state of Wyoming. And that is at $30 million. And a portion of that directed towards assisting the Wind River Reservation and tribal communities. The second being the tribal Solar for All application, which the Northern Arapaho tribe was awarded $10 million. And really, these programs are going to be essential to ensure that certain people in our community aren't left behind in the energy transition. Secondly, when we talk about the Tribal Electrification Grant, this grant was coming through the Department of Energy out of the Office of Indian Energy. And the Eastern Shoshone Housing Authority applied on behalf of the Wind River Reservation, creating a project called Energize Wind River. And really the intention behind this project was to create microgrid solar projects on the Wind River Reservation, especially for residents who aren't close to infrastructure. They're too far away from these electricity poles, that it just makes sense when you are in remote areas to have an off the grid um, facility. And with that, the Eastern Shoshone Tribe was awarded 7.375 million for the construction of that program. So in total, for tribal programs, we're talking nearly $25 million worth of crucial funding, specifically targeted to tribal residents, residents of the Wind River Reservation. And losing those funds would severely impact the tribe's ability to address these critical needs on the reservation.
Yeah, thank you, Big Wind. And just to return to a point I made earlier, so these three programs, a home energy savings program, solar for all, tribal electrification, what is it, 69 million for home energy rebates, 30 million for solar for all, and then another 10-ish million for tribal electrification. I mean, that's 110 million right there just for low income Wyomingites. And those are kind of those like one-time investment. They improve this built environment that residents of Wyoming, need to live and thrive. And then the programs end. But we see them as essential for that long-term quality of life, cost of living, things like that. I'm going to talk real quick, just two other programs that are more on this like business, local government. There is some pieces for residential side of things, but that just a little bit broader for programs that support our communities. One being the Rural Energy for America program. This has been around for a really long time. It's enjoyed bipartisan support, and it supports rural businesses and agricultural producers to invest in energy efficiency and clean energy, which helps them save money on their operating costs. Sometimes for ranchers or farmers, you can have a really huge expense, pumping water, heating buildings, and just doing the work that you need to do. And this program helps to fund some of those projects that could save individuals money. We've seen a lot of demand for that in Wyoming, and as a lot of our communities are more rural, most counties would have large portions of the area eligible for this program, and it can be a really good one. And actually, I know a couple people on this call who've actually received REAP grants. And then another one I want to talk about, which will get highlighted in some conversation we'll have a little bit later with some of our other speakers, is just wanted to flag there's clean energy and energy efficiency tax credits. Those are available to residents, certainly, but also to businesses. Now, to local governments, there was a big change from the IRA through this mechanism called direct pay, where for the first time ever, tax-exempt entities like local governments or nonprofits could be eligible to receive the same tax credits as a for-profit business. Again, these tax credits have been around for decades. They've enjoyed bipartisan support, and they go to improve things like energy efficiency in buildings or clean energy investments, among other things. And so those are two layers of programs that we hope to see continued into the future and get support from Congress as they've enjoyed in the past. Great, John, would you bump to the next slide? Anything else you want to add, Big One?
No, that's
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So I want to broaden some of the perspectives that we've been hearing. So we just talked through the programs, we talked what's at stake, and we want to hear a little bit more about the impact that this is having in communities, on individuals, and what's happening to these investments that were coming to Wyoming. And first up, we have Mariana Pickering. There it is. Who's going to speak, who is a former now AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, here to share some of their story and their understanding of what's going on. Mariana, you want to come off mute and share your bit?
Yeah, thank you. Y'all can hear me okay? Okay. Yeah, first, thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me to tell my story. I think there's a lot of power in telling these little personal stories, and hopefully my little puzzle piece will help paint a bigger picture of kind of what's at risk here. But my background is that I come from the private sector, energy efficient building science company that I owned and workforce development training. And through personal reasons, sold my portion of my company, found myself in Wyoming. As a new member of the Wyoming community, I've always believed you should ingratiate yourself to your new community through service. And this AmeriCorps position came up for a year-long service as an inaugural member of a new VISTA program. So for people who don't know much about AmeriCorps, it's the VISTA program is Volunteers in Service to America. So it's not work, it's volunteer service. We're given a living allowance. So you kind of, they say you take a vow of austerity for the year that you're serving. And the living allowance amounts to less than $18,000 a year. It's very austere. And the idea is that you are embedding yourself within a community that is in need and you're helping them in whatever way that you can. I think the national statistic is that for every $1 spent on an AmeriCorps member, $17 goes back into the community. There's all kinds of private matching that's involved with it, philanthropy that's involved with it, and then of course all of the federal funds associated with it. So these different nonprofits around the country will submit a grant to receive an AmeriCorps Vista person who comes and helps them do whatever it is that they're doing. Our program, our cohort was called ECAP, Energy Communities AmeriCorps program. And we received a little bit higher allowance simply because instead of providing direct service, we were brought on to do capacity building and really help with scaling and growing some of these organizations that are tackling these problems. A little bit of an overview, there is a thing called the Interagency Working Group for coal and power plant communities and economic revitalization. Bit of a mouthful, but the IWG for coal communities is kind of what we call it. And it's a massive whole of government approach to stimulate economic growth in 9 designated coal community areas, of which Wyoming is one. There's also a lot in Appalachia, Illinois Coal Basin, Pennsylvania. And since 2021, through these 11 different federal agencies, a regional commission, plus a lot of private philanthropy. There have been $54 billion in federal investments dedicated to these communities and $315 billion in private investments. And that was as of December. And that's a lot. Wyoming alone, and I can share fact sheets. I sent them to Jonathan before. If y'all are interested, they're on their website. But Wyoming alone had $994 million in federal investments under this umbrella and more than $3.2 billion in private sector investments into the fact that it's energy communities. So again, it's communities that have been designated as going through an energy transition. So our program, our AmeriCorps Vista ECAP program, was meant to be kind of the first of the boots on the ground to help with implementation in the organizations that were trying to implement these things. We were the first, there were 17 of us. We were supposed to be the first of 150 professionals placed over 3 years with $7.8 million in federal and private funding dedicated to it already. Or earmarked for it. We got spread out. So there were 2 of us put here in Wyoming. I was fortunate in that my position is remote. So I work from home in Cheyenne, but for an organization that deals with the entire state. A lot of the people in my cohort relocated to very rural locations to take these positions. And again, we were focused on capacity building, so not just direct services, but helping organizations with job transition, housing stability, food security, workforce development, things like that. And some of these are, most of us were placed in very remote and economically challenged areas, or we're serving areas like that. So February 19th, we were put on administrative hold. This was frustrating because for claims of efficiency, we were still being paid our living allowance. So the money was still going towards us. We were not allowed to work. We were not allowed to serve and not allowed to show up to our host sites. That went on until March 11th. We were finally told that the entire program had been cut due to the executive order on unleashing American energy. And it's kind of an example of one of those things where it's caught up in this vocabulary axe attack to these things. It's not really looking at the nuances of where the benefit actually was. And then, it was frustrating because there was a lot of psychological and financial strain on the actual members, many of whom kind of uprooted their lives to move to these different places and help. And the ones that have been relocated to other Vista programs are actually still on hold, so none of them are allowed to work still till today. So I think, you know, the story is important because it's kind of it's not just that this is, you know, I'm one person, and there's definitely some impact from the job I'm not being allowed to do here in Wyoming, but it's bigger than that. It's you start getting programs self-censoring and not applying for grants, or, you know, self-censoring what language they're using because they're worried about not getting that money, and a lot of strategic support that's being lost for navigating this different energy transition. And, you know, anecdotally, the nonprofit where I was placed here in Wyoming was a state association, and it was distributing community service grants. And just to kind of give you an idea, you know, it doesn't show up in statistics yet necessarily because it's not federal jobs that are being lost, but, you know, in a list of over 200 people around Wyoming that are kind of in positions to be dispersing grants on community service, just over the past couple of weeks, over 50 of those have come back as hard bounces, as in their positions no longer exist. And just wanted to tell that story because I think it's important to know that this wasn't a handout. This wasn't something inefficient. It was something that was an investment in Wyoming's efficiency and growth. And so you know, ending this type of program and things similar to it can really kind of psychologically insult almost the communities that have been powering America's energy communities. Happy to answer any questions later if there's any.
Mariana, thank you for sharing. I'm sure that's not the easiest story to tell, and also one that is really important that people are aware of. This is turning into real dollars in communities and also real jobs, and competitive ways to break into the workforce here in Wyoming with great experience. And I'm sad to hear that did not work out.
Yes, unfortunately, I'll have to be leaving Wyoming because of it, which is also very sad.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
Next up, and we'll just hold questions until the end, but next up, I would like to introduce Zach Isler from Energy Conservation Works. Zach, would you be able to tell us a bit about your community, what some of those impacts are, and what you are dealing with right now as you reel from the funding freeze, and also think about changes in Congress and just, yeah, what's going on in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, thanks so much, JW, and the whole walk team, and just thanks to everyone on this call for taking time out of your day to be a part of this discussion. It's super important. Share your stories. Program manager with Energy Conservation Works. We work in Northwest Wyoming, primarily Teton County, but many of the issues facing homeowners, businesses, and local governments for us are the same all around the state and all around the country, actually. So I'd like to take a little bit to talk about the impacts of a few specific IRA programs at the community and the household level. I'll use a little bit of the work that ECW does as examples. At a high level, we connect people with opportunities to save money, to reduce emissions, and to lower energy bills. That's sort of like the 5-second elevator pitch behind the work that we do. But like many of you, a lot of what we do is trying to address the difficult energy problems we're faced at this community scale. One major energy problem is emissions and their impacts on things like health and resiliency, particularly around the issues of increasing wildfires, extreme weather, habitat loss, et cetera. But a lot of the work that we do focuses on how already high and rising energy costs are having an impact on people in our communities, as well as businesses. Many of you know the cost of power is facing a lot of upward pressure right now. That's for a whole bunch of different reasons. And some of the examples there are inefficient electric technology, poor insulation and weatherization in homes and businesses, volatile fossil fuel costs for sure, and aging local infrastructure. Over the last few years, these IRA programs that JW and Big Wind explained, the ones that we've seen planned or already deployed, really have the potential to be transformative in connecting people with the resources that they need to implement solutions, and make sure that the energy costs that they have to pay stay low, stop increasing, and make sure that we're able to invest in these really critical energy upgrades. There are a lot of layers in the Inflation Reduction Act to help address this. Some of those projects are at the sort of larger regional infrastructure level, down to local government opportunities and initiatives being funded, all the way down to homeowners looking to upgrade their heating systems or windows or electric service. I think one of the big issues that we see being tackled by these programs is energy burden. I know JW mentioned that statistic, which I think is great. Great to keep in mind, bad statistic overall. 41% of households in Wyoming are spending around 10% of their income on energy. So that's the energy burden there. And I know some of you probably live in Rocky Mountain Power territory and have been impacted by these huge rate increases over the last few years. I have just a couple specific examples about how the IRA helps to stabilize these energy costs for everyone, and also helps to insulate households from these costs through energy efficiency. At the infrastructure level, the IRA created the direct pay, which JW mentioned. And just to kind of come back to that really quickly, this direct pay or elective pay, it's a super cool mechanism that allows nonprofits, local governments, and rural electric co-ops to take advantage of a clean energy tax credit. Effectively, this reduces the cost of clean energy projects by anywhere from 30 to 50%. On the ground, and the impact that this has is that co-ops, which serve around half of Wyoming, co-ops and local governments can invest in projects that were otherwise completely unaffordable for. These are projects that use electricity more efficiently, and they're also projects that generate electricity more affordably. One example of that, we're currently working with Lower Valley Energy, our rural electric co-op, and Creative Energies, who you'll hear from in just a little bit, on Wyoming's first community solar project. It's a really great project that is only possible through this direct pay mechanism. It's a 1 megawatt solar farm that's going to bring affordable and clean energy to our local grid, keeping us from having to buy more expensive power from outside the state. And that in turn keeps electric rates stable for everybody. It's kind of this cause and effect, all made possible through this direct pay mechanism. I also want to talk briefly about the household level. I think one of the pieces of the IRA programs that I think is the most exciting is that a lot of these programs were designed to be able to be stacked on top of each other, magnifying the impact of them. So this makes energy efficiency projects attractive to people who weren't interested in them previously or couldn't afford to do them. An example of this is the Wyoming Home Energy Savings Program, which, as we heard, brings $69 million in investment into our state. It offers thousands of dollars in rebates to homeowners. I think the maximums for these are $14,000 for low-income households or $7,000 for median income households if you were to do all the programs. So these specific rebates can be combined with the energy tax credits, which are up to $3,200 a year. Last year, we looked into a couple of case studies, specifically the cost of installing a heat pump. And so when you combine utility rebates, IRA tax credits, and these home energy savings program rebates, we found that the cost to households for installing a heat pump could be reduced by anywhere from 40 all the way up to 100%. I think I'd just wrap up with a couple thoughts about energy efficiency and these programs in particular. I think the energy efficiency encouraged by the Inflation Reduction Act helps to protect households against climbing rates by using less energy to do the same job. And the technologies encouraged, when they're actually deployed at scale, they have the potential to have a real impact and a rapid impact on making electricity affordable, as well as reducing emissions. Plus, we can't forget that the programs reinvest a lot of tax dollars back into the state, and they also create a bunch of good jobs. Whether it's these grant funds, the low interest financing, tax credits, rebates, all of these IRA programs that are at risk, they give us the tools to bridge the funding gap and invest both in critical community infrastructure and in energy upgrades at the household level. I think these programs aren't just dollar amounts. They're real solutions that help us, that help our neighbors, our families, and our communities. So thank you all for being here, and let's make sure we don't lose them.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. Appreciate appreciate the examples and your thoughts there.
I really appreciate you bringing up how the intention that these were meant to be stacked. I think that was a really important piece.
Yeah, and essential for residents, for local governments, for schools, for businesses, to make projects possible. Next up, we have Scott Kane, co-founder of Creative Energies. Scott, do you mind speaking for a couple minutes about impacts on your company and how this has impacted communities you work with?
Yeah, great. Thanks to all of our friends at WAC, and Zach and Mariana for presenting here. Appreciate the chance to talk. Yeah, so I'm Scott. I'm with Creative Energies. We're a statewide solar contractor working across Wyoming, and have Brian O'Neill here with me also from Creative Energies. I'll comment a little bit on sort of the elements of this that affect solar specifically. Of course, the funding freeze and the impact on programs is much broader than just solar, but I can comment on that piece of it here. I appreciate attention already on sort of the naming and describing some of the programs affected. I'll mention a couple of direct impacts as those programs get paused and maybe even terminated. Big Win mentioned the Rural Energy for America program, REAP grant program, or perhaps JW, pardon me. And that program has been around for 20 years and has been a really successful way for federal funds to get pushed out through the U.S. Department of Agriculture to rural small businesses and agricultural producers to invest in energy efficiency and clean energy projects. Great. It's got 20 years of successful track record. What the IRA did, starting really just sort of a little over a year ago, was it expanded the pool of funds that were available for this program and allowed people to apply for larger portions of their project costs. Great. It really amped up interest in this program, and we helped quite a few customers apply for REAP grants enabled through the IRA. We're in a really awkward moment right now. And again, this is like trying to illustrate the impact of these changes. We have a number of customers that we're working with, people who are ready to invest in solar for their ranches in particular, who literally, they have received an award letter from the federal government saying, upon completion of your system, we will pay you a 50% grant, a grant covering 50% of your system cost. Those customers now believe, based on what we have heard from the Wyoming USDA office, that those funds are frozen and there is no answer whatsoever about whether they will be eventually released. So think about the position that those people have been put in. They've already started spending money on their projects, thinking that they would get a 50% reimbursing grant on the program. So it has created a really difficult situation, and we would love to see better clarity on it. The investment tax credit, the energy credit, the energy tax credit that applies to solar power systems has been a real driving force. And this program has been around for, I think it's 16 years now in one form or another. It's changed a bit over the years, but it's a long-standing program that's given people across the country, and especially here in Wyoming, confidence in getting a little bit of federal assistance with the cost of solar power systems in the form of a tax credit that would be received after they complete their projects. The IRA had a couple of provisions that made that even more attractive and broadened the range of entities that could make use of the IRA. As was mentioned already, this direct pay provision that allowed nonprofits or government entities, federal, state, or municipal entities, to make use of the investment tax credit was super powerful, especially here in Wyoming, as compared to other parts of the country. In other parts of the country, corporate entities invest in solar on a regular basis, but the Wyoming has a different makeup that way. State, federal, local agencies, nonprofits actually wind up making up a really big part of the business landscape in Wyoming, and really, in a way, was really where the primary market was for larger solar projects in Wyoming. This direct pay provision is entirely in uncertainty right now. We don't know whether it will continue or not, and it probably is one of the easier things for the administration to cut, because it is a case where the federal government is actually issuing a reimbursement, a payment to the entities that are applying, these nonprofit or government entities that are applying for funds under the direct pay program. So that, while it lasted, was a real driver for clean energy work in Wyoming, and we'd be super disappointed to see that not continue. It was offering really great benefits for communities. Just to name a couple here in our area to keep it sort of on the ground, we've been working recently with Central Wyoming College, who's looking into adding solar on some of their facilities. Fantastic. But that's enabled by this direct pay provision that is under threat right now. We've been working with the city of Lander, also looking at potentially adding solar generation or battery storage for resiliency on some of their facilities. And that's threatened by the absence of the provision. And the one last thing I'll mention, and then just wrap up, is I want to highlight again the Solar for All program. The Solar for All program had the potential to have real impact on the state of Wyoming. You've already heard a little bit about it, that it's targeted to low-income households and disadvantaged communities. And if people have specific questions on it, I noticed that Sam Von Cannon, who's the Wyoming program director for the Solar for All program, is on this call and would be a good person to ask questions of. But that program was really a generational program for us. I think many of us believe that the climate crisis can only be addressed if we're also working on social justice and economic justice alongside. And this is the one program, really, and I say generational, the one program in memory that was really trying to address both a clean energy transition and a social justice transition all wrapped together. And it would have led to 5 years worth of really ramped up solar work, really focused on a much broader demographic than we've ever been able to, bring the benefits of solar to in the past. So along with that, would have been quite a bit of job development, economic investment within the state. So it would be a real disappointment if that program pauses, and there is some uncertainty about whether it's going to be able to move forward. Thanks. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the WAC team, and I think we're moving into a question and answer phase now.
Thank you, Scott. That was really
Thank you so
helpful.
much.
John, do you want to kick us off with action needed and then get to the questions?
Great. Yeah, I can bring us home. I know we have about 10 minutes left or so, and we want to get to a few questions. I think a few of us might be able to stay on a little bit longer if we run over that 1 o'clock piece. So thank you, Mariana, Zach, Scott, for your stories and for your input here. It really has been enlightening, and I think the question that a lot of us have right now and what we're working through actively is, so what do we do about it? And what kind of action can we take as citizens, as organizations, to do our best to advocate for these programs? So we don't have a crystal ball here. We know a lot will happen and a lot is likely to change. But we do know this. Now is the time to be acting. And we're encouraging folks to write our elected leaders, and that's really our congressional delegation, and Governor Gordon. And we think the best way to do that, and we'll show this in kind of future fact sheets, and with information we share at the end of this call, is to go to their websites. They have contact forms and write them. Call them if that's easier for you. There's also an option here of organizing and visiting their regional offices and trying to sit down with staffers and express your concerns about needing to have and protect these programs. And then the last piece here, and we even have some of this in the chat actually, is now's a great time to be telling your story. Peter, thank you for telling your story here about a REAP grant, and maybe being out $40,000. That's huge. That's a really important thing that I think needs to be elevated to our elected leaders right now to understand the implications of not continuing these programs. And I think the messaging on this is challenging. There are many programs that are at risk. And I think what we're trying to do, we'll take feedback on this as well, but in some of the materials that we follow up with, is condense it to be as simple as it can, which is really, I think, first and foremost, support the IRA and bipartisan infrastructure law programs that Wyoming and tribal governments have already vetted and they've already been approved for. That's kind of the high piece, the tagline that I think we can say, and it actually encompasses the programs that we were talking about today for the most part. So stay tuned for walk fact sheet coming right after this call. If you have questions or feedback, please feel free to reach me. I have my email here in the PowerPoint, and I can help coordinate that through the relevant staff. And I'm going to take us off of the screen share here, get back to the full gallery view, at least on my end. We have time for a few different questions if folks have them. Perfect. If folks have a question, let's see, go ahead and you can raise your hand. And I'll be looking through the chat and try to circle back to that. So Madeline, I see you have a question. Go ahead, feel free to unmute yourself and let's hear it.
Okay, thank you for this wonderful webinar, really informative and concise to the point, nice getting examples as well. So thank you all. My question is, how can I connect with other people in my town or nearby towns to have a few of us go together to visit a regional office? I was wondering if WAC can maybe help coordinate get connections like that.
Madeline, great question. Yeah, I think that's something that we could do. I'd email me and we could talk about it here. I know we have, between myself, JW and Bigwin are going to be tied up next week actually in DC. But we do have organizing team here who might be able to help in some ways. And yeah, we'll try to get people together to go talk with our congressional representative. Email me. Any other questions from folks? Scanning through the chat here. And as folks ponder that, I'm going to put in the chat the link to our action form, which gives a lot more specific detail as well as, well, it's an action form that folks can take a look at in order to get messages started that we've talked about as being really important right now, especially knowing that folks are going to be in DC next week, not just from Wyoming, but from around the West and around the country, talking about these programs specifically. So let me drop that in here before anyone leaves. And this should go to everybody. You can take a look at that. And again, we'll be following up with more information and fact sheets to help you all address your messages. So Shannon, looks like you have a question.
Thanks. I just had an announcement that I know WALK is teaming up with one of our local nonprofits in Jackson Hole Climate Action Collective, and artist Ava Reynolds tonight at the Center for the Arts from 5 to 7 with some arts and climate action, an event that includes some letter writing. So this was a great preview. If any of you are in this corner of the state, please come.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Shannon. And Helen, I see you were on the call, Helen Lewis on our staff. Thank you for being there. And a big shout out to you for helping to organize that.
Thank you, Helen.
Well, folks, thank you so much. We're at our time here. Again, feel free to follow up. That's why we're here. If you have any additional questions, expect some more information for us. Now's the time to be reaching out. So sharpen your pencils, get your hands ready to type out some letters. And of course, ask us if you have any questions or need any feedback. And Madeline, looking forward to connecting with you about possibly some regional visits. Wonderful. I'm going to close this out there. Thank you all so much. And we hope you had a great lunch.
Thanks. This was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm a team. And thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you, Walk.
Energy.